Hey everyone, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Darth Carnivore. My name is Charlie, and in this video I want to discuss my testosterone lab results as well as my lived experience after 2 years of pretty strict carnivore. Now there's two general themes that I see when I've done some research on testosterone level. The first one is that usually based on some combination of these three US-based studies, testosterone has been declining in men so that young men today have the same level of testosterone as older men a generation or two ago. The other angle I've seen testosterone is usually in the context of TRT, HRT, injecting steroids, as well as low testosterone just generally not being a good thing. So I wanted to throw my story out there and experience so far on carnivore, raising it naturally without any of that stuff. All right, so here's my testosterone lab results. The most current one is on top. It's just a snippet there. It just says over 1,500, and I get flagged as high for that. But you can see from July 23, which would have been about a month on carnivore at that point, transitioning from keto, and it was kind of a dirty carnivore, higher protein version. I was still doing some dairy. Maybe some sweetened electrolytes at that point, but you can see it was steadily stayed around 700, 800, 900. In December 24, I had a very poor night of sleep, so it tanked my testosterone down to 527. But once I got the sleep dialed in, I got rid of the dairy, got rid of the sweeteners. My testosterone level started to rise into the quadruple digits consistently to 1193, 1349, and then most recently above 1500 there. So this prompted some concern from my family doctor, and he wanted to measure some estradiol just to give it some context. He was also asking me if I felt any tenderness around the breasts or anything like that. So I guess the concern is that with that level of testosterone, some of it could be converting into estrogen through that enzyme called aromatase. But in this case, my estradiol is within a normal range, so my testosterone isn't getting converted into, estrogen, basically. In a couple of these labs, we also measured free testosterone. So this is the amount that is not bound to sex-binding globulin, I don't know, SBHG or whatever. So it's the amount of usable testosterone, basically. So you can see that in December 24, again, that's where I got really poor night of sleep. It tanked my free testosterone, so a lot of it wasn't usable, but then it shoots back up into the normal range by my most recent lab result. So it just shows that I'm producing a lot of testosterone. It's not getting converted into estrogen, and a lot of it's usable, so it's very well regulated within very well controlled within the body for those high levels. Now I'll be honest that when I switched from keto to carnivore, I wasn't necessarily looking to raise my testosterone level. I was just looking to calm the food noise and cravings and addictive behavior, and which it did. And I also resolved the last of my pre-diabetes. So I was able to get from a A1C of 5.7, 5.8, 5.6 on keto down to 5.3 to 5.5% consistently on carnivore. But I wasn't expecting testosterone to consistently stay that high, but it also matched up with my lived experience. So the way I experience high testosterone in the setting of carnivore is that I just have abundant energy. It feels like I'm going downhill when I do a lot of things. In terms of activity, I have abundant energy. Recovery is really good. For context, I work out pretty intensely between 30 and 60 minutes a day. I do 15 to 20,000 steps at least per day. So I'm very active. I do exercise when the schedule allows for it. And I have to really work hard in order to feel a little bit of soreness the following day. And then, I just also experience it as, I'm very calm energy, consistent throughout the day. I think a lot of people that have side effects from high testosterone, like aggression, mood issues, acne, which I don't have. It's probably more than the body can actually handle. But when your body is naturally producing testosterone that high, it's just experience. You get like all the benefits and none of the bad stuff associated with it. So I think a large part of it is my strict carnivore diet. So for context, I don't drink any coffee, sodas, teas, energy drinks, exogenous ketones, or anything like that. It's just primarily red meat, eggs, salt, and water. That's it. I don't do any of the flavored electrolytes. I avoid seed oils to the extent that I can. I avoid or try to avoid plastics. So I store my my food that I prep for the week in glass containers as much as possible. I drink out of a metal tumbler instead of plastic water bottles. So the overall result of what I do eat and what I avoid is that my fasting insulin levels are usually in the low single digits. I elevated slightly in December when I had that bad night of sleep, and then in 2025 when I switched to a higher fat version of carnivore from a higher protein version previously, the insulin levels stayed pretty good there. So that's a direct result of my pretty simple diet, a lot of meals on repeat. The other aspect of what my diet does, in addition to lowering insulin levels, is that it also lowers my inflammation as well. So my most recent HsCRP result was, it just didn't give me a number, it just said below 0.15. So I think it's making the foods that I do eat maximally available, because there's no fiber or anti-nutrients to compete or block or hinder absorption by the body. So I think combined with low insulin levels, which is kind of a green light for testosterone production, along with low inflammation, it means my body senses some safety and that it is willing to invest in a metabolically intensive process of producing high amounts of controlled, usable testosterone for the body. Another marker of inflammation is looking at the omega-3 to omega-6 ratio. So in 2 years ago, my omega-3 ratio, this would have been early carnivore for me from keto, it was 3.8%, which is not great, and now it is 11.34%, which is well into the optimal range. And then the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio went from 11.7 2 years ago to now 2.3 now. So very close to the top of the optimal range there. So that is 2 years of avoiding seed oils and supplementing with some fish oil, basically, when I don't eat fish. One other thing I wanted to show too is I found an old lab result from January of 2010. So I would have been about 26 years old at this time and 350 pounds, give or take. So this was before I had started losing, or very early on when I first started losing weight the first time doing keto, several years ago. So it's 330 then, which I think is pretty average for most men today probably. But I've almost quintupled my testosterone naturally without doing any injections, HRT, TRT, or anything like that. The older I've gotten, so it kind of flips the narrative on its head that a lot of us men expect that testosterone declines over time. A lot of things malfunction over time, but in my case, for 2 years, a little over 2 years on the carnivore diet, it seemed to have dramatically, not only healed my type 2 diabetes, sleep apnea, high blood pressure, that kind of stuff, but it also gave me, almost like a superpower that I never had before. So, I attribute this to my body sensing a degree of safety based on what I'm, giving it and what I'm avoiding, and being willing to invest in a metabolically expensive, risky process. I mean, it is basically like renovating a home. You're not going to do that if you sense scarcity and whatnot. So, I think, hopefully my story illustrates that there are ways to raise testosterone and that get at, achieving metabolic health at the same time. I guess I'll finish up by just rounding out a few other things that may have contributed to my consistent lab results in 2025, which is like my second year on carnivore, doing it pretty strictly this time. I do some supplementation, so I take vitamin D3, K2, magnesium, iodine, fish oil supplements that I mentioned before, and boron, 5 milligrams of boron each day, which works pretty well with my other electrolytes, but I think it also has some moderating effect on free testosterone a little bit. I also get a lot of sunlight. So when I walk the dog or mow the lawn or do any gardening work, I'm usually outside shirtless just to kind of absorb as much vitamin D as possible, the natural way while we have the seasons, working with us. I also don't do any. I think I mentioned this. I don't really do any caffeine either. So, and I think that helps a lot with sleep. So I get a lot of 6 hours uninterrupted sleep is usually what I do pretty well on, 6.5 hours each night. I work out, recovery is pretty good. And yeah, so hopefully that helps you all out, kind of understand how I think I got to where I am with these testosterone numbers in proper context.
Disturbing your lack of ketosis is.